Let's see. Yeah, that's on. All right. There were a couple of scenes at the end of the episode that I thought were really good scenes, really good ways to finish out the episode. And we have one more episode in the season. So we're going to break up the season finale a little bit because I think there are several things going on in the episode that I want us to look at that would be good to spend a little time on. And so we'll be doing that beginning next week too. I did want to spend this week looking at the whole episode because there wasn't really a good place to break it up. I felt like this was a pretty solid, it was a pretty good, like there wasn't really a good spot to, yeah, I did like the whole, you're going to a dinner party. Oh, I'm not invited to dinner parties. Well, yeah, you're not going to be to this one either, apparently. I guess if you throw enough parties, you're not invited to very many. Again, this is episode 7. There are 8 episodes in the season, so in each episode, there's a little bit of material to unwrap and look at and kind of pour over. One of the things that if we, quote unquote, if we have time, so to speak, that I want us to look at, but I don't want to spend time on it at the beginning because I feel like it'll take a while to go through. And if you've done it in like a study of the book of John, you will have done it in great detail. And so, but there's the conversation with Nicodemus that I think there's a lot of value in the way that they structured it. I also feel like if we have time, there's value in understanding why they did it a certain way versus some of the things that we see in the text, that the way John presents the story. Right? Because, this is something we've talked about several times. We even mentioned on Sunday, this idea that when we're reading the Bible, we have to understand why the person writing is writing the way that they are. We're not reading a clinical, analytical account. We're reading the way a person wants to present information. That doesn't mean that they're lying or that they're being dishonest or anything negative. It just means they want us to see certain things, and they emphasize those things. And by necessity, when you emphasize certain things, there are certain things you just don't get to mention. And if we have time, we'll look at that, but maybe not. We may not have time for that. We may have to wait until somebody teaches John, and then whoever that teacher is, you can spring it on them and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And then they'll be completely confused because, it's somebody that's probably not going to be in here necessarily. What's that?
Your teachings, John.
Well, we've already gone through this. We've already talked about some of these things. So you already know what some of those things are. One of the things I noticed, I'm just going to go through them kind of in a little more, in order, so to speak, I guess, for a little bit. But with Mary, there was that section in the episode with Mary where I think she apologized about 7 times. And that whole section, I guess I was kind of thinking, like, and I guess this is even true today with Mary, like, she's not known for any great things that she did. She's known for her past. She's known for, like, her mistakes. And maybe this happens in the Gospels in general. I'd like your thoughts. I know David already has the mic, so it won't be that long to get it to you. One of the things I've noticed, especially in the Gospels or maybe in the Bible in general, and maybe especially only because it's a book we study more, I feel like sometimes, for lack of a better way of putting it, a lot of the biblical characters, if we're not careful, are very flat. Like, we don't see all of who they are. We just see a couple of individual sort of points about who they are and what makes them who they are. And with Mary, it's, well, this is who she was. We could do the same with Peter or any of the other. But with Mary specifically, I was thinking in this episode, they were kind of pointing out that she was well known for how terrible she was or how demon-possessed she was. Usually we say that sort of tongue-in-cheek to mean like you need help. But for her, it was like, she really did need help. Um,
At some point, she had an attribute with a highly negative connotation, and
Yeah.
therefore that just generally, like, whether or not the condition, whether or not the condition of said statement at the time of evaluation, once you have that condition, there's this permanent connotation that remains with you about the fact that talking about this really vaguely, just that.
Yeah.
That sort of, you messed up once, and that's now, but something maybe wasn't even in your control happened once, and now that's the only thing anyone can know you by.
Yeah, you accidentally dye your hair pink one time right before the first day of school, and suddenly, for the rest of the year, you're Mr. Pink. And that never happened as far as I know to Aiden specifically, or me actually. But yeah, like one negative thing, whether it's under your control or not, and whether it's something that's negative in one way or a different way, that becomes a defining characteristic. Do you guys know what that's like? Like, is that something that you guys feel like you've struggled with at different times? Like sort of being looked at through like one lens or one way of looking at things. Like you are this kind of person. And there's more to you than that. And it may not even be a negative thing. I mean, I don't really know if anybody thinks of Glenn as that guy from Boeing in this context, or as, whatever the label is, right? But, all of us probably have different labels that they're not complete representations of us. Did you get the impression that Jesus looked at her that way? Like, you are this kind of person? Again, she apologized like at least 7 or 8 times, I felt like. And yet, I don't know if Jesus ever accepted her apology. He kind of rejected the whole concept of an apology outright because, what's that?
And so she continued apologizing.
I still didn't, sorry.
And so she continued apologizing.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to accept my apology, so I'm going to just keep hurling at them until you. But and I think that shows us something about, and this is something we see in the Gospels as much, as anything else, is that Jesus takes the person exactly who they are. We see that with Nicodemus or the woman at the well. We see it, with the woman with the Syrophoenician woman, or with any of these other people. He already knows who they are. In fact, that's a point. I didn't know about this. That's a point in John 2 that Jesus makes, is that, or that not Jesus makes, John makes the point about Jesus, that he didn't need anyone to testify about man, because he already knew what was in a man. And of course, man in this case is gender neutral. It's just, he knows what's in people. The word may not be, but the point is, he already knows what's in people. In John 2, he's saying it to lead to the Nicodemus conversation. There's some other things going on there. But he already knows what's in people. Like, he doesn't need somebody to tell him, oh, I need to tell you about Aiden, because before you talk to Aiden, you need to know a little bit about him first, or whatever.
Managing between letting people tell you things, not for plot, because like the Bible isn't plot, but like there's that, everything of like, again, because of that word between the line of like God being Jesus, right? That yes, they're the same thing, but like how that letting development happen while also knowing stuff also allows people to tell you things.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point with that Mary conversation, too. I assume that's where you're talking about with this, is because, like, Mary's like, yeah.
Allowing them to have their point.
Yeah, like Mary's telling Jesus about this discussion with this Pharisee, and like, did you get and I don't know, maybe it was just me, but as I'm watching it, I got the impression that if I were Jesus, I'd be like, listen, Mary, I already know all about Nicodemus, I already know about the conversation, I already know about the deal you made. In fact, I've already gotten some people over here to get a room ready for me because I know we're going to go over there. Like, you don't have to tell me the story. Yeah. But instead, he's like, I'm just going to listen to you tell this story. I'm just going to let you tell. Like, I'm going to let you go through this because it's important to, for Mary to apologize 7 times, to go through this process. feel like there's a lesson in prayer there too. That in a very like mean way, God already knows what we're praying for. Like he already knows all the things. I was talking to Tina Simon earlier, and she wasn't going to be able to be here. She was telling me because she was having some health issues. You know, on top of that, she like did a bunch of stuff on Sunday, and then, not that I know what she's dealing with at all. Obviously, it's more than not me, but I'm still like finding energy level issues. So for Tina, you know, it's the same thing. Like she did a lot Sunday, and then like it wipes her out for 3 days, and we understand that. So, you know, when we do a prayer, we're gonna, you know, when we have a prayer, we're gonna, you know, talk to God about Tina and about what she's going through and about, you know, those kinds of things. But we're not, to your point, we're not informing God of anything. You know, God's not up there crocheting and saying like, oh, yeah, what's my good friend Tevye doing? Or whatever. You know, he already knows this. But the process of prayer is meant for us as much as any other thing we could point to. Yeah.
Rituals, actions, like just general actions before like you would have no true purpose other than to literally ground it in your mind almost. Like, there's no particular reason we do something like.
Well, even like baptism, for example.
And not even just in living, like,
Yeah.
especially in religious things, it's just that there's no reason we do it other than that just grounding yourself in that confirmation yourself.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I mentioned like baptism, for example. The action of baptism isn't special in and of itself. You know, there's nothing specifically like physically inherent in that action. But God has said, I'm going to place value in this action. And when I ask you to go through the action of baptism, it has the value because of burial and because of immersion and because of washing. And there's all these meanings that are attached to it. But at the beginning, God could have chosen some other thing that would have been just as valuable. But he chose this thing to attach meaning to. And so we do that thing because God said, this is the vehicle upon which you're going to have, you know, the forgiveness of sins. You know, so baptism is where sins are forgiven. But it's not like, and this is the point that Peter makes in 2 Peter, that it's not baptism that, like, it's not the washing away of dirt from the flesh that causes us to have a clean conscience. It's, you know, it's the cleansing of the soul. The verse flew out of my head for some reason.
It's the same case as, I believe, second opinions.
Yeah, second opinions. I love second opinions for. Yes.
That's not a given.
Yeah.
It helps and like it puts you in the mindset, it puts you with others guaranteed, but like that's not a requirement. There's not a lot of physical requirements.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And you can look at like the first century church. They didn't go to church. They were together. They were together in people's homes or in public places or wherever. They wanted to be together. And of course, over time, to your point, over time, they were together and they're kind of like, well, we need to be together, you know, and that's where you start seeing buildings come in. It's like, we need to be together, but maybe there's not enough room, or maybe this isn't really conducive, or, you know, Sarah didn't do dishes last night, so we can't meet at our house. You know, let's meet in this other location. It's not like, yeah, going to a certain building at a certain, there's nothing special about the building. It's the act of us being together. Yeah, exactly. And again, that's what I would look at in some of the episode too. And specifically, I guess not going against what you said, but I did find, I think we're skipping a little bit here. I did find it interesting that when Jesus, this is down at the bottom with Peter, Jesus tells Peter, get used to different. Do you guys remember that phrase? You know, get used to different. I kind of thought that was a neat thing. Of course, because Jesus comes to revolutionize the whole system. Yes. But even taking away like the whole religious system, like, and I realize that's what he's talking about, right? Like he's talking about our access to God and our opportunity for forgiveness and the breakdown of the barrier between Jews and Gentiles and all of those things.
It's going to be more diverse.
What's that?
It's going to be more diverse.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot more diverse. There's a lot more opportunities here. But even like get used to different because Matthew's coming. Like,
so many layers. Of
yeah.
Literally, figuratively, literally, and then
So looking at this idea of Matthew and Peter, because there was that moment. I don't know if that's. I'm trying to remember now where he said "get used to different," but I feel like it was right there with that Matthew section. I don't, but it wasn't. Okay, good. I thought it was, but yeah. But one of the things that I really liked about that section was the connection that, and I think I've made it with a couple of you guys after discussion time, is this idea of like Peter and Matthew should not get along. Like there's no,
polar opposites.
yeah,
Societal.
yeah, these are not the same people. And they look at the world differently, which we'll talk about in a second too. I had an online question a minute ago about this too that I wanted us to discuss a little bit. But they're very, very different people. And I'd like your guys' input on this, even though it might be a little, you may not want to answer, and that's okay too, you don't have to. But I do want us to think about it for a minute. Who is that person for you? And I want us to do this 2 times. If you're Peter, who is a Matthew kind of person? Who's the person that is outside that you might not really have a great time getting along with if they were inside? Does that make sense? If you're Peter, who's the person that you don't think Jesus should welcome? Period. Right, because that's the point in the story. The point of the story is Peter says, essentially, you shouldn't let him in. Like, Jesus, if you're the person I think you are because you're like me, right, you shouldn't let him in. So who's the person that we would tell Jesus you shouldn't let him in? And again, I think that this could get kind of, if we went around the room, this could get antsy and weird because you might say something and then somebody else is like, wait, that's me. And that would get awkward. And then we'd have to turn off the live stream because we would pay-per-view that. I'm joking. But the other thing I think is also, to me is a pretty fascinating conversation, is what if we were Matthew? Like if you're, and again, we can picture the scene because we just watched it, Jesus is calling you, like you specifically. He's saying, Carolyn, follow me. He's saying, Curtis, follow me. Tony, follow me. You're in there, you're looking out, you're seeing Jesus, and he's saying, follow me, and you're looking over Jesus' shoulder, and Peter is standing there. And who would that person be? That'd be hard for you to engage with that person because of your relationship with them. And maybe this is like a specific person, like a certain individual that you would have a hard time with, or a kind of person, like Matthew was a tax collector, and it wasn't really Matthew, it was the tax collector. And then realize that they're invited too. Yes?
Labels tend to alienate more than they bring together.
Who does?
Labels tend to alienate
Yes.
more than they bring together.
Yeah, so Carolyn says, labels tend to alienate more than they bring together. Yeah.
Every single group is known by its most toxic and rude, just generally
Yeah.
worse individuals. Or worse, like...
Especially now, I think that's getting to be more true where groups are known by some of their worst behaving individuals. But I think even then it is because, in this case, we're talking about 2 of the disciples, not some of the other ones. I don't even know who Dad is. I couldn't figure that out. Did you guys have a problem with that? There was in the episode, Jesus looks over one of the disciples and is like, hey, Dad, how many, or whatever. Like he says something about, and he calls him something, but then the closed captioning called him Dad. And I was like, I don't know who. Maybe it's
It might have
dude.
been like
Maybe he said, "Hey,
Gad
dude."
or...
Hey, dude, cut 5 days worth of firewood. I don't know what I don't know who that was. Do you know who it was? Thaddeus. That makes
Thad.
sense. That makes sense. Thaddeus, not Dad.
Dad.
Hey, Thad. Hey, Thad. That's, If I ever meet a person named Thaddeus, I'm just calling him Dad from now on. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had no idea. I was just like,
Me either. I was like, all right, that's Dad.
yeah. Apparently he's calling somebody Dad. This is awkward, but I didn't write the script. But like there was that. There are a lot of other disciples there, but we're talking about these too, because apparently there's going to be some animosity there. One of the things I don't know if this is fair. I haven't talked to the creator of this show, so I can't speak to his decision-making process. But I feel like, at least at this point in the episode, that Peter is pretty true to what I imagine him to be. Like he's who I imagine the kind of person Peter is would do the kinds of things we see Peter doing in the show. And I see Matthew being the opposite of Peter. Like some of the characteristics we see in Peter are some of the characters we see in Matthew are the opposite of what we see in Peter. Like Peter is very decisive. I know the answer. Why don't you understand the answer? This is what we should do. We need to do this. You know. And Matthew is all of the not that. He's very indecisive. He doesn't even want to climb a ladder when he knows he wants to climb a ladder, and yet he doesn't want to climb a ladder. He doesn't want to eat grapes, and then he does want to eat grapes. He doesn't go see his parents until he goes and sees his parents. Like there's a lot of indecision. There's a lot of he likes to clean things, which I mean there's some hints that maybe I don't know if they're trying to bring in some character traits of autism or some different sort of characteristics of those kinds of concerns, which I don't know that would necessarily be. We can't know that about Matthew, and I don't know that the ancient world was really set up with the kind of language or terminology to deal with any kind of diagnoses in that way. So that's all just made up to a degree. Yet on the other hand, I see that some of the things he's doing are made to be opposite of Peter. I guess first of all, do you guys feel the same way about Matthew? Like I feel like they've created his character with a certain bent toward. Yes.
Even the actor choices I saw as completely opposites. Like the actor, I don't know how height compares, but his face is a little broader, and versus Peter's, which is very long, like tall.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things.
And I've even noticed like Matthew kind of shrinks.
He does.
And Peter's kind of like leaning into everything. So even some things like that too.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. I feel like those have to be intentional choices. But to my mind, it just leans itself into this idea that Jesus' disciples were not one kind of person. They were all kinds of people with all kinds of circumstances. Curtis, yes?
I think one of the other aspects when you think about Peter and, one of the other aspects when you think about Peter and Matthew, or any of the other disciples of Matthew, not only was he a traitor to the Jews as a tax collector, but their thought is we need to protect Jesus, and he's going to be the Messiah that kicks the Romans out. And Matthew is working with Romans. They can extrapolate to, wait a second, this guy's going to come in here and then eventually turn Jesus over to Romans. So it's not just a societal thing, it's, wait a second, this guy's an enemy. And I'm not just a traitor to the Jews, but he's actually collaborating with the enemy. And it's just one of them. Because today's based on the show, he's been talking to the local magistrates, and he's guarded by them. So there would be a lot of stuff all around their heads.
And yes.
Peter as the defender, and we see that, you guys will see that part as the show goes on. Peter's like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? They all the way to the end. Pulled out a sword, that's all we hear.
And it certainly seems like that all of that is accurate, true to life, so to speak. Matthew would have had deep connections with the Roman state. He would have been seen as a sellout, regardless of his own personal position. Like his beliefs don't matter. He's a tax collector, therefore he's a sellout. And this was true technically in some respects also, realistically. It's true that, he would have been seen that way. And he would have had to have given up some of the ceremonial cleanness and, holiness laws and things like that. But yeah, if we're going to protect Jesus, this is going to be a lot harder now. Matthew's making this harder, not easier. Let's see. Okay, so let's go back to the original thought, get used to different. I think we've discussed what he meant. Get used to different. Get used to people like Matthew. Get used to us changing the way we're doing things. Peter, get used to different because you've already gotten used to different in some ways. You weren't sure when I called you either, was kind of what he said to Peter at the beginning, or, during that exchange. What does that mean for us? I don't think that get used to different is a phrase we can't use. I think get used to different should be just as valid and valuable for Christians today as it would have been for Christians in Jesus' day. I say that because anything that, in my mind, I know this isn't technically true, but I feel like, in my life there's more truth than not. Anything that feels natural and normal and easy is probably not the best way to do the thing. Jesus calls us to do things that are quite not natural and quite not easy. Yes?
Yeah, there was a time when he was in the field and he was like, we're going to be nomadic. We're going to be wandering around. We're not staying in place, sorry, this isn't the hotel. Not going to be ritzy.
You're good. And also, I noticed in that too, you were saying like, okay, we're going to be nomadic, and Jesus is basically saying that's fine by me. And they were just like, yes, but that's not fine with me. There was that sort of, but then there was the thing of like, well, how much wood should we chop? And he's like, we should cut 5 days worth of wood. And again, even in the video, there's this very specific thing of like, I thought we were not staying 5 days. The whole idea of like, that's not something I would think of. I wouldn't think of cutting 3 more days of firewood than I need because someone else is coming along here. And yet those are the kinds of things that as Christians we should continually be pushing toward. Not getting used to normal and continually asking, what's my next step? I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he was making the point that any time we feel, I'm trying to think of like, basically anytime something doesn't go right is an opportunity for growth. Anytime that things feel a little awkward or difficult is an opportunity for growth. And I don't know, I kind of thought that made sense in this respect too, of like, we have opportunities to be asking, how can I continue to grow in this situation, no matter who we are? And I think one of the better examples of this, although I have no idea, Curtis, where this is going, is with Nicodemus himself. That hesitancy to follow Jesus now, like Matthew does. And yet we know that he's in the background for all of Jesus' ministry. For the entire ministry of Jesus, he's somewhere in the miasma of this idea, because when Jesus is dead, he's right there. He's there and that seems to be kind of the idea with John, is he's there at the beginning, and he's also seemingly there at the end too. And so that seems to be one of the ideas that we're looking at with that also. And one of the thoughts online that I'll mention is, again, sort of this concept of Matthew being I believe the technical term they used was a bit of a wimp. Do you see that as an issue? Is that something that you think is true to life for Matthew? Is that something that you would? How does that fit in with what we're looking at?
Takes all kinds.
What's that?
It takes all kinds.
Yeah, again, that there are all kinds. That Peter's the kind to get in your face about something, and Matthew's alive because he hasn't done that. I imagine typically if he had been the jump in your face kind of person, He would not be a tax collector anymore. I will say that I thought they did a pretty good job on Jesus and Nicodemus' conversation. It is much, much, much more complicated in the text itself. Obviously, the writers of the story couldn't do it that way, because not only would Nicodemus and Jesus have been confusing, we would have been confused. So they had to kind of boil it down to what was really, like what the underlying message was. But Jesus has layers of meaning that Nicodemus has to dig through. One of the reasons for that seemingly in the text is, and we discussed this in our teen class a couple of times, is that Jesus wants layers that Nicodemus has to dig through. And in the next chapter, when we see Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman at the well, he removes those layers. He digs through the layers that she puts up to get down to the root message. Where with Nicodemus, he's laying on layers to make it a little harder for Nicodemus to dig through because of, seemingly because of his own relationship with the law and all those kinds of things. And then Lynn mentions the fact that Jesus' teachings also were very different, and many expectations of his were really uncomfortable. And I don't know that this hasn't been brought out yet, but most of Jesus' parables are famous and were long-lasting because they're enigmatic and they don't make any sense. Yeah, he has parables. Pretty much most of his parables are ones that at the very beginning I don't understand. I don't get where this is going. We've listened to them our whole life, so we don't necessarily have that same confusion that they would have had. But again, getting used to different would have been a big part of any kind of ministry that Jesus had. Curtis, did you have a?
Actually, I have a comment from Stephanie on my phone.
Oh, fantastic! Yes.
She just shared that it's interesting when you think about Matthew and Nicodemus, both hold positions of wealth, and one was willing to give it up and the other was not.
You said between Matthew and
Nicodemus.
Oh, that is a good point. I had not considered that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it either, so she sent me the text. But it's
Yeah.
interesting, and Matthew potentially may have had actually access to greater wealth over a course of a lifetime than Nicodemus ever would have had.
Yeah, there
Yet he
seems
was
to be a
willing to give it up.
lifestyle. Yeah.
And Nicodemus is not there yet.
Yeah, I think you're right that there was a certain lifestyle that he was used to living that he's giving up. Now again, I haven't seen it because I'm trying not to, but it seems like there's this idea of him having access to cash that then he is able to use for the ministry of Christ, and that certainly is a line of thinking I had never thought of until this episode. But you're right. He gives. There's a difference between being theoretically rich and being really rich. Like Nicodemus was rich in that he had a lot of stuff that was very valuable.
That's because when treasures he stores for the physical world don't matter in the long
Yeah.
run, does not mean that they cannot be utilized in the right now.
But I would make the argument that simply Nicodemus' wealth is very showy wealth, and Matthew's wealth is like very much, I'm using this to make my life better. I'm using it day to day, and so he's going to be suffering a lot more for the cause of Christ very short term than someone like Nicodemus would, who, he has a golden bowl over here to eat salsa out of or whatever, but whatever, who cares? But when it comes down to, I need, these things to live the life I'm accustomed to, that's a very different thing. And I think that applies more to our kind of wealth than anything else. We don't really have Nicodemus kind of wealth, but we do have a lot of things that we take advantage of to live a comfortable life that we're used to.
Purely for show is not as used, showing off is still definitely part of
Yeah.
life. That's not nearly as potent with everyone. It's not everyone's week to have.
Not everybody shows off their wealth in this time until they have kind of massive amounts of wealth. Do we? Let me get out a short paper real quick. Do we have people that we want to pray for specifically? I know Tina. We discussed Tina's health issues a little bit earlier. Are there other people we wanted to be specific in mentioning? I don't really know anything, but the Ayers are supposed to have their baby yesterday, and they don't have one yet, but they're supposed to have one. And I don't exactly know all of the details there, but I'm sure that's slightly stressful, just a little. So, you know, in my mind, you know, the Ayers are, you know, going through a lot at the moment, so they could definitely be on our, you know, would benefit from some prayers also. I just don't have an update on that. And as far as I know, she went home from the hospital last night, so we'll kind of see where we are. Other individuals, people we want to keep in mind?
California's on fire again,
Yeah.
and I just had 2 separate fires lose their houses tonight.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have 5 more that were evacuated, so it's kind of a nightmare. right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I know that, and I think that's something we saw last year, especially with the wildfires like in Australia, is it's one thing to be like, oh, California's on fire. It's another thing about the people that are in those circumstances and who might lose their home and might not, and what is this going to look like, and how does that, you know, how does this look for them tomorrow or next week?
Different kinds of,
Um,
it's on fire.
Yes, exactly. There are kind of different levels of connection with, you know, what's going on there. I actually didn't know about California. I knew that there were some different wildfires around, but not. I just haven't kept up with the
We
news.
just had another one start tonight. 2 campers started it, and it's actually threatening the whole town of Placerville right now, so.
Okay, okay,
And
yeah,
rescue.
yeah. I kind of know. I kind of know where those are, a little. Yeah, yeah.
One of them has 5 kids, so,
Blast from the past for me.
but just pray for the people of California, oh my gosh.
And then Adam mentions Willie Weber, who is an ex-coworker, has 2 brain tumors, and this was on the Facebook group as well. So you know, those who are here, especially those who are online, you might know a little bit about the situation there because of it being on Facebook. But definitely I know the wildfires are, you know, have been causing major problems, and it seems like this is kind of where we are for a while.
Well, we
You
were
know.
in Santa Cruz last year, and we got evacuated 2 times. So, I mean, if we, like, you could walk, like, you walk 5 houses down, and that was the ocean. That's how close it was. Like, it just burned everything. But
Yeah, and when you're that close, there's no, that's probably why they evacuate you, because there's nowhere to go.
no,
You
there
can't,
isn't.
you know, they're only a couple of ways out. At least when I lived in Sacramento, and which is in the middle of the state, nowhere near the ocean, but still there aren't a lot of, you know, exits once you're close.
Sacramento's getting burned down by all homeless people, so.
Yeah, I can't disagree. Um,
But hey, Newsom's gonna get recalled, so
yeah.
that's a plus.
So let's have a prayer, and then we will wrap up our class, and then we can spend a little bit of time hanging out or whatever while we're shutting everything down. But let's have a prayer before we close. Dear God, we thank you for this time that we can be together, where we can explore your world and explore our place in it. Help us to recognize that, you know, your kingdom is going to take people of all kinds, people like us, people not like us. Help us to be welcoming and accepting, to give grace and friendship, to give a hand and help up, rather than you know, trying to put limits on the grace that you have given to us, especially. And help us always recognize that the people around us, no matter how far they seem from you now, they have a place in your kingdom to through your Son, but also because of what your Son has done. And help us to be a light and example, but also recognize the light and example of those around us. You know, our fellow Christians that are trying to make an impact in the world, and help us to work together with them to display your glory in the world that we have. We know that there are those that are on our hearts and minds, and for, you know, a lot of different reasons. You know, we know that Tina Simon is dealing with some health concerns. We ask that you would, you know, be with her, be with all of us as we reach out to her, and as we build up relationships with each other and encourage and strengthen her as she goes through those situations, and help her to regain some strength over the next couple of days as well. Be with Ayers family as they're looking at having a baby in the next little while. Be with them as that process takes place, and give them strength, and also help them and help all of us to realize the opportunities that you give us to recognize your work in this world, and help us as we gather around them and be with them and encourage them through the next steps in their life. I ask you to be with Willie Weber and their family, and the process that's coming up for the tumors, and the surgeries that have happened, and recovery from that, and also looking forward to what lies ahead for them, and help the people that are around them to recognize the needs that they have, and the radiation treatments, and everything that's coming up. We also ask that you be with all the people that we don't know, some of those that we do know, but in the wildfires that are coming up. It seems like those are more often and more deadly and more serious than they have been. We just ask that you would be with those who've lost everything, be with those who are worried and concerned that they might, and help those, the people that are working there, the firefighters, the different healthcare individuals, that lives would be saved, and that those people would have an opportunity to continue to live, and to have the value that they have in their life, and help us as we have opportunities with people like that, and in those difficult situations, whether wildfires or other things that happen, that we would always be able to extend grace and help in those circumstances. Help us as we go through this evening, that we can look for opportunities to share your word and share your grace with others. Be with us throughout this week and the rest of our lives, that we can always look to you for guidance and strength, and wisdom and courage. In Christ, let me pray. Amen. Guys, thanks for coming and joining me in discussing this episode. Next week we're going to look at episode 8. We're probably going to break it up a couple of times and discuss it in a little more detail, but we will figure all that out on days that are not today. See you guys soon.